Now we're going to have a quick talk about making sowing plans and putting plans in place, because I think when I go on farm to do visits, we're mapping farms, we put a plan together. Yes, the plan changes, but I think you guys, this is an example of a plan here?
This isn't all of it, but this was Tocal's sowing plan. So myself and Matt kind of come up with the paddocks, put them in. The next slide will just also show a bit on mapping, which I'll talk about, but yeah, that's just a simple Excel sheet that's calculating what needs to be sorted, what needs to be ordered. This is probably a little bit more extensive than some farms might, keep it a bit simpler, but one thing probably unique about this farm, as Matt discussed, you've got corn paddocks, you've got kikuyu, you've got cropping paddocks. So not only are we pulling out corn early, so we've got early feed options in there with, for instance, we had P7. There was a rye, oats and brassica mix. So yeah, there's a lot of variability just because we had different things coming in, which we'll discuss, as we said, early options and
the plan is that what I really wanted to stress is that there's a lot of things that you need to go into it and really thinking about what you need to do. So assessing your pastures, like I'm doing a lot of beef farms now that have lost a fair bit of their perennial pastures from the drought. So it's working out what has been lost and what hasn't. Fantastic opportunity now to be able to get your perennial pastures up and going while you don't need the land as much. Okay, talking about we don't need to put nitrogen on, or we also don't need nut grass, crabgrass, all these sorts of things growing for no reason, when we can actually deal with that, start getting them in early and all those sorts of things, and get them established. So, matching your feed demand, matching feed demand is really important, but it's not the only consideration. A lot of people just go, I want more feed for the winter. But if you can't grow feed in the winter because your conditions or your rainfall or due to heat or frost or whatever, there's no point, putting too much emphasis on it. It's probably more about, when I talk to guys about that, their feed demand for their animals might be sort of something like this, okay? And their growing feed pasture might be something like that, okay? So you sit there and go, we need a lot more feed here. But at the end of the day, if we don't have the ability to choose something in a species and an environment that's going to be able to do that for us, but we could probably, jack it up here a bit, and we can also do a bit more over here, so we can actually do a better job of it, and then start to fill the holes in over here. That sometimes works out more beneficial, because you might be able to grow another 5 tonne over here, but yes, you can grow something in here, but it might be only an extra half a tonne or a tonne of feed. Okay, so understanding when you need the feed, optimising your resources, your rain, your temperature, landscape, soil types, etc. It's really important to go through all that. Spending money on lucerne and chicories when it's only going to get wet and flooded, and all those sorts of things. It's just pointless. So understanding what species are going to fit where. Quick feed options. Grazing management, rotation management, rotations. What do you want? Spring, summer, and in the next year, because looking forward to what you want to be doing next spring and summer is important for what you want to be putting in plan now. Okay, so and complexity, like some of the best farmers I get to deal with is they like to keep it simple. Having 6 or 8 different feeds to try and do one rotation on is difficult, and you're changing feed and you're going to change their gut and you're doing all these sorts of things. And if you get on lucerne for a week and then you're off the lucerne for a week because you don't have enough of it, and then they're onto some other feed and all this sort of stuff. Trying to set up a system that isn't too complex as well, that you can actually run a simple business on, is really important.
So I've just thrown this one up here. Basically, this year, Tocal actually has a pretty good map if you ever want to go on and have a look, but this map of which is a program I use for paddock planning and recos and things like that with clients. So we've punched in all the data basically. You can see different colours in there. For instance, the yellow paddocks are corn paddocks on that map. So it gives you a bit of a plan. If you're ringing up your local store to order seed, you can quickly flick across, and I really encourage using a mapping program on your iPad or whatever it may be. There's lots of free ones out there. And you can come up with a bit of a plan and get an idea of your total areas and how to manage them. I've also thrown that photo in there. That's just an NVDI output off the satellite imagery off Ag World from about a week ago, and it just gives you an idea where he got feed. So due to basically a colour index. So basically, you can also look at where you're going with where feed's growing and where you don't have feed, where you need to be next. It's just a bit of a tool to use. So obviously that's probably at the other end of the scale, but just a simple farm map. It comes back to that simple planning. It can be really helpful and help with your management.
If we're going to take one thing away from today and preparing for autumn, I want you to really keep this in the back of your mind. Whenever guys are ringing me from now on when they want to start sowing, these are the 4 things that I talk to them through about trying to achieve a good success and get ryegrass or brassicas or oats or whatever it is established, okay? First one is light, and sorry if it's too small for the back of the room there, but the first one's light. Seedlings need to see light. If they don't come out of the ground and see some light, they're not able to create their own energy, okay? And especially the smaller the seed gets, the less energy it has, okay? So the quicker it's going to die. Okay, so what's a couple of things that's going to affect our light? Students? Previous pastures, yep. So might have to just call that thatch or competition. Yep. Yep. So it'll affect it in terms of how quick it grows, but in terms of the closer you get to winter, the slower it's actually going to produce leaves. So leaf emergence is to do with light and heat. Okay, so that will happen, but typically most times of the year, as soon as it's out of the ground, as long as the sun comes up, my dad used to say that the day the sun doesn't come up, it's going to be a bad day. So as long as the sun comes up and you don't have anything impeding it, it should be right. But yep. But your thatch and stuff's probably the biggest one, and we're going to have a big problem with that this year. I've seen guys go on mulching, kikuyu, leaving a thatch that big, and they've just spread or drilled ryegrass underneath it, and they're expecting this poor little seed to have enough energy to get right through all that thatch and come through and be a plant. So there's one more that's probably pretty critical. Where do we put the seed? Yeah, sowing depth. So yeah, depth is really important as well. Okay. So the smaller the seed, the shallower it goes. But there's big things with that. Is if we're spreading it on top of the ground, I'll wait until we get to temperature actually for that. Yeah, but yeah, sowing depth's important because if we go too deep and it hasn't got enough energy to get up to the soil, okay, to start seeing the light, it's going to be cactus. Different soil types, different depths.
Different seeds, different depths.
Yep.
Key one.
Temperature.
If they are throwing seed on top of the ground and got that thatch here, it's just not going to contact the soil to get up, is it?
That's exactly right. So most guys are pretty good at understanding that they'll spread first and then they'll come through and mulch. But even then, if you put a thatch layer above it, it really struggles to get up through to get to the light. But yeah, it's definitely a good point that if you're spreading some seed on, you don't want to be spreading it on after you've mulched. Because then, again, tick these things off. What's the next thing? Temperature. Okay. So we know temperature is really important. For different species, it's different. But let's talk about ryegrass for a sec. DPI would say sort of 20 degrees, 19 degrees. Soil temps, I sort of go about 23 and dropping. We've seen some research showing that ryegrass can germinate at high temperatures, but it's not so much the germination as well. It's also, once it comes out of the ground, for its ability to be able to survive. Okay, so when we get to some treated seed, I'll show you some issues around that. So again, Warren, exactly like you said, if we're spreading seed on top of the ground in a thatch, okay, what's our enemy in terms of temp? And the next one, moisture. So we need moisture as well. If we're putting seed on top of the ground, what's the chance of that seed being able to get moisture in the soil? Pretty impossible, isn't it? Yep. And in terms of temperature, let's say the soil down here might be our 22 degrees, but if we've got a 40-degree day outside, right, our thatch, you know, you might get some protection from the thatch, but air is your enemy. Air conducts heat, okay? If you're conducting heat around that seed, one, it's going to dry out, two, it's going to be hot and potentially kill it and die, okay? So that's why direct drilling, putting seed to soil contact is so important, especially if you're sowing early. I've got guys that do this in May, in June, and they have good success. But what are they doing? They're ticking off these things. You know, the temperature's a lot better. Moisture's a lot better. Do they get much feed? Not a lot, because they don't start grazing it until August, September, because they've missed the boat. Moisture, it's a given, but a seed can't actually start its job until it starts taking up moisture. Its first stage is to suck some moisture in, send signal to the seed to start growing, okay? And then that's going to start its process to go. So moisture's the first thing we need to get and tick off the box. Dry sowing of ryegrass, if you spread it, obviously there's issues around heat and that seed dying. If you dry sowing into good seed, into good soil at good temperatures, and you get enough rain, I've seen it work, and no issues. But the issue with it is if you're, depending on your soil profile of moisture when you do dry sow, okay, we get a 5 mm rain event and you have no moisture underneath that, you get something that germinates and then says, where's the rest of the moisture? Okay, that's when you might run into trouble. So personally, in the environment we're in here, typically we get enough summer storms. We look for the event when it comes. As soon as you can get on the paddocks, we get into it. Most of the dry sowing I used to do was all out west, okay, where they knew that if they got that 20, 30 mils of rain, and we'd all work on different sowing depths to challenge that, that, you know, they might not get rain for another 6-8 weeks, and that's important in terms of them trying to get a grain crop, etc. For us, we get enough events typically that we can run in and go. But it's a really good point because I'm lucky enough to go across a lot of farms, and you know, the guys are organised, they've got their plans, okay, they know what they're going to be doing, they've got the seed sitting in the shed, okay, the rain event comes, okay, that few days later they're into it, they're sowing, and away they go. Okay, the guy next door, he just says, oh, it rained, so then he goes and tries to get some seed and messes around, and then 2 weeks later he gets it back, it's starting to dry out again. Oh, look out, we've got a heat wave coming from out west, it's back up to 40 degrees, and then all of a sudden he doesn't get success. But the bloke that was ready to go and organised has done 80 hectares and looks fantastic. And then he'll blame something else for his own management. Nutrients. Nutrients is important, we've sort of gone through that already, but you know, they need to start taking up nutrients to get some production, as we said. So what impacts these? High thatch levels, like you said, loose soil, sandy soils, paddocks with silage removed as well, because one of the better techniques that I see is guys remove silage and they go straight in and sow, and they get a really good result because they've ticked off a lot of these bottoms. Like the light's going to be easy, temperature's not a problem because they're going after an event or they've got the right conditions, moisture and the nutrients. This is a really, and again, like everything we talk about here is not a prescription, and it's not something we're saying you have to go and do, but this is just a concept idea of way that, and you guys are probably already doing this, but the way that I sit down with farmers and we start to set up a plan about where we're going to sow and how we're going to do it. And there's another heap of ways you can do it, and there's a lot of stuff you can add to this. But typically we're trying to put a plan together. We've got what we want to put where on all our paddocks, okay? And we're starting to, you know, look at what can we get in early, okay? So it might be paddocks that are non-recoverable pastures, okay? So they've gone through the drought, they're coming back with all weeds and all that sort of stuff, so we deal with that. We don't need the feed at the moment, so, and most will be rubbish feed anyway. So we start coming in and getting those paddocks ready to get some autumn feed into them. They might be summer cropping paddocks. Matt was talking about it earlier. His corn paddocks are going to come out and then they're going to straight back in. Okay, so they're going to be nice early paddocks away. Paddocks selected for early planting after silage. Again, That's what we keep saying is, and if this was a whole kike farm, like I was saying before, you'd go in straight after silage, you sow. If you want that to be kike and coming back next year, I'd suggest that that part of the farm becomes the late sowing next year. Okay, so then the kike actually gets a good chance to put its roots down, gets a good summer and autumn in, okay, and it builds up as a better pasture. Some of your mid stuff might be late summer crops, perennial pastures, cut for silage again. Typically, when I'm dealing with farmers in dairies, they're flat out over here rotating on this stuff. This late planting stuff might be kikuyu or chicory or lucerne, and they've got a really good rotation going. They've got good quality. They're keeping on top of it. They're managing it. Okay, and that's what they're doing over here. This stuff started growing, so all of a sudden they've got a night feed or they've got a strip over here as well. Okay, this stuff's just coming out of the ground, and then you start planting behind the cows. So then you might just start, once the cows graze this, then it gets planted. Okay, so that's all your later stuff. Now that's not going to suit everyone, but that's a option that we typically do.
I'm just going to throw this one in here. Again, one of those other things that affecting a successful establishment and a successful crop. So here, pretty clear cut, no starter used. It was DAP at 100 kilos, just so you know. And then obviously 130 over on this side. Might just quickly go, if you want to draw up what we spoke about yesterday about spreading and using a drill seeder. So currently there's been a lot of questions, guys not wanting to put fert through their drill, whether it be contractors or yourself, worried about equipment damage and things like that. I'll put my agronomist hat on and say best practice is going to tell you to put it through the drill. It's pretty simple. There are issues with rusting and things like that, and that comes back to a maintenance thing, cleaning it out, washing it out once you're finished completely, good coated diesel or WD-40 through it, and just do your best. We wouldn't have put fertiliser boxes on drill seeders if it wasn't beneficial. I think that we'd have bigger seed boxes. So, reality of it is they're there for a purpose. When we talk about, I guess, phosphorus especially, phosphorus is not overly mobile in the soil, and anyone that's done soil tests know it builds up as well through good nutrition. But, we talk about thumbnail basically is where it's going to move laterally. So, if you've got a plant that's here, a seedling that's here, and you went out with your fertiliser spreader after sowing and threw your starter fertiliser on and it lands here, it's not going to get that phosphorus, especially not when it needs it early on. Okay, so the whole concept about drill seeding and applying fertiliser through the drill is that fertiliser and seed is in close proximity, and obviously we're using fertilisers that are safe, aren't going to burn, that coleoptile that's coming out of that seed. So I guess, if worse comes to worse and you can't put fertiliser through your seed box, well, spreading's a good option, but if you can, please do it. I think it's a no-brainer. And also the concept, if you think about this, when you run a drill seeder through the paddock and you've got a hectare and your agronomist has told you need 100 kilos of DAP per hectare, 100 kilos of DAP through a drill seeder run is at a higher concentration than 100 kilos of DAP through a spreader that is landing in larger, in a larger surface area. So in terms of response to that money you spent on fert is going to be much more beneficial. So, if you've got a contractor coming in and they're saying, oh, we don't want to do it, try and insist if you can and get them to put it through the box, because it's, at the end of the day, you're paying them on that front. If you're doing it yourself, it's another half hour at the end of the run to wash out and blow out and give it a coat with some diesel. So I guess that's my opinion on it. I think, Josh, anything else to add to it? Or
so just as a diagram, you've got in-row fertiliser. Okay, so the crosses are our seed. So we've spaced our seed out nice, and it happens, doesn't it?
Seeder, Matt.
Precision seeder, Matt. Look, this is how good this is. Unbelievable. So, and then we've got our fertiliser that's gone down the row, and there's the same amount of dots this side of fertiliser as that side. Okay, but we've got all the fert right next to the seed. If we talk about a phosphorus plant, that's probably too big, but let's say that's a phosphorus unit of fert. It's probably going to move that far in the soil. So it doesn't move that far. It's tightly held. So what we're saying here is you've got more chance for these poor little roots when they first start to establish to start to access some nutrients, okay? Because they've got a lot more concentration of the fert within that root zone. compared to these poor fellas over here that are starting to get going. You got the same amount of fert, but they don't have the access. They've got to travel further before they start to get the access to that nutrient. Okay?